They say life is what you make it. So what happens if you actually try? What if you actually tried to get your mind right? What if you actually tried to live the high life? What if you happen to die cause life is finite? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? What if you actually tried to get your mind right? What if you actually tried to live the high life? What if you happen to die cause life is finite? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? What if you actually grind out when the time's right? What if you actually blinded by your hindsight? What if you actually find out what defines life? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? I'm getting 1% better every day. I'm getting 1% better every way. I'm waking up every day to a sunny day. No matter what the weather say, life is like a record, so just let it play.
All right, everyone. Welcome to the very first episode of Best Day Ever. I'm your host, Matt McKeever, joined with your other host, Adam Martin. Hey, Adam, how you doing?
Hey, excellent, everybody. I know I'm extremely excited to get this kicked off, so welcome.
Yeah. And so this is our very first live stream. We think we're doing everything right, but if you guys are currently watching us on any social media platform, we would really appreciate you jumping in the comments. Just let us know, can you see us? Can you hear us? Is this all working? Because we've been working very hard behind the scenes to try and pull this all together. But again, this is a brand new endeavor. And with any brand new endeavor, we would also love it if you guys would subscribe. So if you could subscribe on whatever platform you're watching this on, follow us on Twitter, all that good stuff. Very much appreciated. In fact, I'm pretty sure, Adam, I was checking this morning, I'm not even sure if you're subscribed to our YouTube channel or our Twitter. So again, lots of room for us to gain new followers today, and we would absolutely love to do that. Have you subscribed, Adam?
I wanted to set us up for success this morning and say we at least got 100% more subscribers today. So I did actually notice that as well, and I intend on correcting it immediately after the show.
All right. Well, Adam's going to juice our stats later today, but we'd love it if you guys would juice it right now. And we've got lots of stories we want to jump into. And just to kind of set the platform here, essentially with Best Day Ever Media, our goal is to provide 2 shows every single weekday. So we're going to be live at noon Eastern Standard Time, Monday to Friday. The first hour of the show is really going to be focused on current affairs, news, what's going on in the world, and just us sharing our hot takes and perspectives on it. We really will be striving to talk about both sides of the political spectrum on these stories, with the ultimate goal of just getting down to the bottom of the truth. I think that right now it's so hard to understand whether you're coming or going, and very difficult to follow the narrative. So we're hoping to make that just a little bit easier for everyone. The second half of each day's show will actually be focused on, a subject matter deep dive. So in today's episode, we're going to be going deep into SMART goals, exploring why SMART goals are important, how Adam and I have, successfully and sometimes unsuccessfully implemented SMART goals, and then just sharing best practices and tips, hopefully setting you guys up for success as well. And, later on in the week, I'm really excited. We've got some other special shows. One I'm really looking forward to, I think, will be Wednesday on culture jamming. So it's going to be a broad spectrum of different topics we'll be covering every single day. And for today's current affairs and news, what we're going to be talking about is Credit Suisse. There seems to be a lot of news going on around whether they're in trouble or not. Seems like they're even getting a little bit of the Streisand effect when their CEO came out and said, don't worry, we've got liquidity. We're all good. We're also going to be sharing a story from CBC News here. So that's the Canadian, federal broadcaster. And they're talking about the radicalization of young men. I'm really excited to share this with you, Adam, and get your perspective because I don't know. Well, I guess I won't lead the jury on this one. We're also going to be talking about how Fentanyl Cash is essentially siphoned into Vancouver real estate here in Canada. This is a big story that definitely doesn't get enough attention in the day-to-day news. And then finally, we're also going to be talking about Europe's potential energy crisis, but some implications to telecommunications there as well. Again, we're trying to highlight stories that I don't think you're going to find covered just if you're tuning in to your weekly news broadcast at 6 p.m. From your local stories. But before we get into those stories, just thought I'd check in. It's, new month, great opportunity for new habits. Adam, any new habits you're looking to implement?
Yeah, I'm actually extremely excited. And part of the reason why we started this show is so that we can improve ourselves and get 1% better every day. And I've taken that into full effect here in my research for actually what's going to be tomorrow's show, which is on sleep. So I've started some new habits to really improve my sleep and my wakefulness during the day, including waking up at a consistent hour, waking up and immediately getting some sun in my face, and I'm on my eyes and in my face, as well as a cold shower. I started with a cold shower today, and I'm a little bit regretting it because I'm honestly freezing right now, but I'm feeling extremely alert. So getting those new habits in has been unbelievable over the last few days.
Nice. Yeah, I've recently just started revisiting some old habits that I just kind of let fall by the wayside. So, a couple of years ago when I was like starting my real estate businesses, trying to do motivation for my teams and things of that nature, I would start every single morning watching maybe 2 to 3, like 5 to 10 minute YouTube videos that were just like pure motivation, right? So most of us have like stumbled across them at some point in the algorithm. I don't know. There's just something about like hearing other people talk about how motivated they are, how hardworking they are, how dedicated to their craft they are, that just fires me up first thing in the morning. So that's one of the new habits I'm trying to implement currently as well. But I guess before we get into the main news stories, I'd love to jump into this crazy little what the fuck story. I guess I meant to say WTF. We're already demonetized. My bad, Adam.
It's all right.
Screen share here. There was this story kind of making the rounds about China and their transnational policing gone wild. And I've got the actual report up here, guys. There'll be a link in the video description down below, or you can always jump over to our Substack and get all the links to all the stories we're covering over there on Substack. We've also got a Telegram chat that we're going to start implementing today. So if you guys want to share your thoughts, your opinions, you can jump into the comment right now in the live stream, or you can join the Telegram and share your thoughts and perspectives. I really find this interesting. So I guess there's a lot to unpack here, but I'm going to start with just this article from the Post Millennial. Trudeau government allows China to open police stations in Canada to monitor Chinese nationals. Now, anyone that's kind of paid attention to how China operates, they don't necessarily feel confined just to their, geographic jurisdiction. They're actually focused on managing, all Chinese nationals and even like ex-Chinese nationals in that regards. And now again, they're not the only major government to ever do this. Lots of stories about the CIA doing, interesting things on other countries' jurisdictions as well. But this one, I think, really caught a lot of people's attention just because they didn't realize how prominent it is, right? So we're literally talking about over 110 overseas Chinese transnational policing stations that are set up. And for us in Canada in particular, what we should be aware of is that there's three apparently in the GTA. And honestly, at this point in time, I wouldn't be shocked to learn that maybe there's even more of this going on. What is very interesting, in my opinion, is this feels like a different approach to imperialism than what we've seen in the past, right? So the US, they've got, I think, literally over 100 military bases in other countries. Here we're talking about China having over 100 police stations to police their own citizens and ex-nationals. So on September 2nd, a new law was passed in China, giving the government more authority when it comes to handling online fraud committed by Chinese citizens overseas. It is set to come into effect on December 1st. And what really drove a lot of this was the National Post, as well as this this non-government organization here that's broken down exactly what's going on. We can kind of see a map here of all the different countries that it's confirmed have a Chinese police station there. And if I do my control F here, we can actually bring up Canada, and we can see that Canada has 3 as well. Look into other countries in the Americas. New York has 1, Brazil has 3. We've got Argentina with 1, Chile and Ecuador with 3 as well. So I just find this fascinating because it's something that I'd kind of stumbled into a while ago when I was going down the rabbit hole of a book we're going to cover later on in the show called Willful Blindness. But was this on your radar, Adam, before it kind of broke into mainstream news? And what's your general take here?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, I've read Willful Blindness, and so I had a little bit of an inkling to what was going on here. But just to see it actually going through the news cycle again, I think is important for people to just understand and perhaps, weigh in with their opinions on whether or not this should be going on.
Mm-hmm. And I think we're going to see more consequences from this down the road, right? In the book Willful Blindness, the author Sam Cooper, he kind of explores how the Chinese state is able to put inordinate amounts of pressure on Chinese nationals and ex-nationals that are abroad. I think that unless you're really paying attention to this subject matter, it's really easy to either be completely oblivious to it or blow it off as like no big deal, right? Like, well, if China is worrying about Chinese citizens, why should I care whatsoever? But again, we're constantly hearing, both rumors as well as stumbling into facts of how the Chinese state is able to manipulate a lot of their citizens and ex-citizens into, if not outright being a spy, potentially being a asset for espionage, right? Whether that's simply providing some information, giving a login or two, or things of that nature. In fact, I covered this in a previous show. I used to do the Maple Pill months ago, but there was one report that claimed that up to 1 in 3 Chinese nationals could actually be somehow tied in to China's espionage ring. And it's just a fascinating thought, because I think that a lot of us here in the Western world, particularly in North America, we're so coddled and insulated and just used to what we consider to be normal, that the idea of these, Chinese police stations all across the globe, it's almost just difficult to register, I guess. We're used to America World Police, but now we're really seeing China World Police as well.
Well, it's interesting when you kind of bring it into context about America World Police, right? I mean, one of the interesting things that's been going on with America in the last, dozens of years has been they've been invading countries, right? Like they're truly policing countries by establishing military bases and military presence in these countries, where we see superpowers like China sort of skipping that angle, right? I mean, they're just going to set up base in your country without having to take it through force, which I think is a unique way of thinking about things, and perhaps a little bit contrary to how, us Westerners think, right? I think we think more in a chess-like way, where it's direct conflict, it's battle, pawns versus pawns, and the king sits in the back, where I believe that the more Asian cultures go about it in a less direct way, which is perhaps, a more intelligent way to insert yourself in, a variety of nationalities.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us fall victim to normalcy bias here as well. So however our country or the Western world developed, we just assume that every other country is going to follow a similar path, right? So if China's going to be this rising star, this rising empire, we kind of just assume they're going to take the exact same steps the United States did. But similar to how we see, countries developing in Africa, sometimes they're able to skip steps or sidestep certain steps in industrialization and development that in the Western world was necessary. So whether we're talking about, literally just like telephone lines, well, you don't necessarily really need to worry about building the infrastructure in Africa for telephone lines if you're able just to create cell phone networks, right? Same with like broadband internet and cable and things of that nature. Well, can that just be satisfied with satellite infrastructure instead of necessarily having to follow the exact same like copy pasta approach that Europe and North America did when they really industrialized and became first world countries? And I think that we're going to see something similar play out when it comes to geopolitics, right? And in fact, I would argue that's what we're seeing play out right now with China as well. Anything else on this before we kind of move on here, Adam?
No, I think that's great. Thanks, Matt.
All right. So before we jump into the main stories today, we just thought we'd give you guys a couple daily recommendations. I've got one here that I'm definitely bullish on. If you guys have never heard of Dave Smith, he's he's a funny comedian, but also a very intelligent political pundit, in my opinion. I'm a big fan of everything Dave Smith's doing. And in particular, he was recently just on the Joe Rogan show. So if you guys want to have a easy introduction to Dave Smith, I really encourage you check it out this episode. Now, it is 3 hours long, but they cover a variety of interesting subject matter. If you guys decide that you want to go down the Dave Smith rabbit hole, really encourage you to check out his podcast, Part of the Problem. I know recently I kind of got you on that, right, Adam?
Yeah, I've been absolutely crushing through Part of the Problem and been viewing it, significantly. So I think there's only 2 episodes I've missed actually in his entire category of shows. Absolutely love the podcast, and I think he's got some excellent hot takes that are well informed, as well as I think he does take to look at he actually make a really good to be a truth seeker, as well as to actually focus on like a steel man and a straw man argument of all the things he's talking about. So I really appreciate that about his show.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And again, you'll find Dave Smith running in similar circles to Scott Horton, who also has a great podcast as well, the Scott Horton podcast. I encourage you guys to check it out. But what's really interesting about Dave Smith in particular is he's a big proponent and supporter of the Libertarian Party. And for anyone that hasn't been paying attention to the Libertarian Party in the United States, I don't really necessarily blame you, because it hasn't felt super libertarian recently, or at least up until extremely recently, where we saw the Ron Paul libertarians kind of go up against it's Gary Johnson, if I remember correctly, and we saw the Ron Paul supporters essentially take control of the Libertarian Party through the Mises Caucus, and Dave Smith is a big factor in that as well. So again, just encourage you guys, if you're libertarian, if you're kind of freedom leaning or freedom oriented when it comes to politics, this is definitely a rabbit hole I'd encourage you guys to go down. But we'll move on here and we'll jump into our first main story of the day. This is about Credit Suisse. I guess before even talking about it, had you seen this kind of on the timeline and stuff, Adam?
Yeah, I've certainly seen a lot of speculation in the Web3 community about what's going to be happening here with some of the financial markets and potentially cryptocurrencies. So that was something that I've been thinking about. And obviously, when we hear about these types of issues, it makes us reflect, right? So I started thinking back to 2008, some of the financial crisis issues. So definitely interested in unpacking this story.
Yeah, and I guess one of the biggest struggles I have in regards to this story, and we'll pull up the screen share here, but is essentially around whether this is even bearish or bullish news. And now I understand why thinking that if Credit Suisse has liquidity issues or if they're about to become insolvent, why that should be very obviously a bearish sentiment. But in this time of rising interest rates, of QT, right, quantitative tightening, and at the same time, Bank of England immediately capitulate and reverse from QT to QE, quantitative easing. Part of me wonders if Credit Suisse is actually in trouble, if the markets might not somehow like interpret this in a unorthodox manner and see this as actually bullish, or at least as bullish towards the central bankers having to step in and provide more liquidity to the financial markets, which maybe will, push down the road any potential recessions or consequences from a recession if we currently are in one. I still don't think the Biden administration's came out and admitted that we're in one. So again, we'll have to kind of wait and see how the powers that be want to frame this. But understand, Credit Suisse shares hit record low, CDS spike to record high after CEO letter backfires. And the Financial Times, I must have timed out here in my loud articles, but I encourage you guys to check it out. And I thought they had a really interesting take on this. Credit Suisse and the CDS Streisand effect. So the Streisand effect, for anyone that doesn't remember, this relates back to Barbara Streisand. And I honestly, this feels like the early aughts. Maybe it was like 2010. I don't exactly remember. But way back then, essentially Barbara Streisand's, I think, home address was shared. And she like freaked out about it and tried to go after the individuals that had shared it. And it turns out whenever you tell the internet not to do something, it's almost always going to do the exact opposite of that. And that's kind of what, created the Streisand effect term. Well, we had the CEO of Credit Suisse come out on Friday and say, we have absolutely no liquidity problems. We're going to be good. Don't worry about us. And then this weekend, we saw all kinds of different, fear, uncertainty, and doubt articles coming out taking aim at Credit Suisse. And in fact, my buddy Graham Stephan here put together a great Twitter thread just breaking down what it looks like right now. So for perspective, 600 billion, that's what Lehman Brothers held in assets when they crashed and took the economy with them. 2,800 billion, that's what Credit Suisse and Deutsche Bank control in assets under management. So that's 4.6 times more. And Credit Suisse is at a critical moment now, says the CEO. And Graham goes on to kind of speculate what's in store in this regard. Now, obviously, no one's got a perfect crystal ball or insight into these, giant multinational corporations or these giant international banks. However, it definitely does seem bearish. We're seeing them take a real beating right now. I heard that there was rumors of some emergency meetings going on at the Fed as well. I haven't been able to find on the timeline an exact breakdown of what that's about. I think it was going to be a closed doors meeting. So we'll probably won't know exactly what this all means until tomorrow or later on in the week. But I guess quick hot take here, Adam. Do you think, how will the markets react to this if we do see Credit Suisse be in a tough position? Do you think this will be bearish and this will really kick off a new Great Recession or push us into maybe even that D word, the depression? Or do you think that we'll just see the central bankers open up the floodgates, printing press goes burr, and the markets will actually rebound because, free money?
I honestly don't know, man. I'm a little bit horrified about what could happen. I think this could kick off a really good depression. I just listened to a podcast recently on the Patrick Bet David podcast, so the PBD podcast, and he was featuring the former CEO of Washington Mutual, which is a company that got absolutely devastated in the last financial crisis. The gentleman's name there is Kerry Killinger, and it's a fantastic exploration of the type of assets they were holding and why it kind of led to this systemic crash after they were acquired by JP Morgan for 1/100th of their valuation in the months before, the years before. So I honestly, I think that this could lead to really bad financial consequences for equities and for like cryptocurrency is something that I'm personally invested in, and it's definitely something I'm looking at. On the other hand, I think you make a really great point. I think there's absolutely an opportunity here for the powers that be to want to kick this can and start the printing presses up. So I think it's really hard to say what they're going to do. And I, I feel no more informed about what I think they'll do the more I go down this rabbit hole. So I think that's a challenge too for the average person. I mean, what do you do right now with these existing circumstances?
Yeah, and that is a great point. And it's one of the things that we really wanted to try and focus on here with like BDE Best Day Ever is not only talk about the news, but try and give you a so what. And I guess when looking at this story, one of the so whats that really come to mind for me is the importance of an emergency fund. And honestly, the last decade, it feels like, at least here in Canada, and I would argue the United States as well, I could understand why people didn't necessarily feel like they needed an emergency fund. It seemed like everything was going well, markets were going up, economy seemed relatively strong. But I think in these times of extreme volatility, where you literally can't tell whether Credit Suisse is imploding, and if they do implode, whether that's really a net bad thing or whether we'll somehow walk out from that unscathed, I think it just makes for a stronger argument for an emergency fund. I think it's very wise in these uncertain times to have a couple months of your living expenses just set aside, literally in like a savings account or cash or gold or whatever you consider to be a safe store of value, right? And that's a very individual decision, but understand those that have a little bit of time on their side, they're not necessarily going to be as reactive and not necessarily going to fall victim to blind panic. Whereas those that are literally living paycheck to paycheck will potentially find themselves in a really tough spot, in a squeeze, if we end up seeing the economy go to hell in a handbasket.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, guys, we're not just here to kind of, gripe and preach to the choir. We know that some of you are aware of this stuff. We're actually creating educational products and shows. So every Monday, we're going to have a entrepreneurial and personal finance show. That happens after these current events and after the last 24 update. And it's during those shows where we're actually going to be giving you tactical tips that will, allow you to better improve your financial position and prepare for things like this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really look forward to being able to go into those like longer form shows and deep dives and things of that nature. But now we're going to pivot from Credit Suisse onto a CBC News article. If we can pull up the screen share here again. And this one, I don't think you've really seen it, Adam. So I'm really curious to hear your hot take. I definitely know where my biases stand. Again, this is from CBC News. This is our national news outlet funded by the government here in Canada. It's a slippery slope. How young men fall into online radicalization. So Reed Brown says YouTube started showing him problematic content when he was 13. And I'll just read a few clips here from the story, but I think you guys will get the gist of it very fast. It started out pretty benign, he recalls. You're watching something about teen fashion, and then the next thing you know, the algorithm would push you to a Ben Shapiro video. Though Shapiro describes himself as a conservative political commenter, his views are controversial and some are outright discriminatory. He suggested, for example, that transgender people suffer from a mental disorder. While Shapiro is not affiliated with any hate groups, experts in media, gender studies, and the radicalization of young men say that commenters' content is prevalent in online extremist communities. And here's just Reed Brown here, the individual they're talking about. And I want to go into this one part here because the examples they use towards this radicalization, I'm just going to say I find it interesting. The videos Brown watched as an early teen were often misogynistic, he said, and it started to affect the way he thought and how he interacted with people at school. I remember repeating some sexist attitudes, things about the wage gap, especially when I was hanging out with my guy friends. We were repeating all these things we were seeing on the internet, a lot of sexism and misogyny. And now, honestly, I feel like misogyny is a new buzzword that's really only, fully been fledged out in the last decade or so. But just a quick reminder in case you ever actually looked up the definition here, I've got from dictionary.com, right? So, a misogynist is a person who dislikes, despises, or is strongly prejudiced against women. Now, when talking about online male radicalization, Adam, Ben Shapiro, is he's the top of the pyramid in your opinion?
Yeah, I don't think so, Matt. Like, if anybody spends any time consuming Ben Shapiro's content, I think he makes some really exceptional arguments for a lot of the social issues that are going on right now in the world, and like the things that are getting a lot of attention. But I don't see him radicalizing anybody.
Yeah, it's really difficult for me to think of him as radicalization as well. It's just even interesting to hear like this 13-year-old Canadian boy was apparently watching teen fashion and then somehow got pushed Ben Shapiro. That just sounds strange to me as well. But I really do want to unpack the claim here. So I remember repeating some sexist attitudes, things about the wage gap. And that's essentially the extent of the radicalization they share in this video. Now, the sexist attitudes, I don't really know exactly what that was. So maybe that's a legitimate concern. Maybe it's not. But we're talking about the wage gap. I don't think that we can just blindly paint with a giant brush here and say, like, the wage gap completely exists. And, anyone that questions it or questions the methodology that comes to that conclusion is inherently a misogynist. They're sexist, right? They're a radical. That just seems crazy to me. And now, certainly, online political pundits like Ben Shapiro, like Jordan Peterson, like Steven Crowder, they've explored this subject matter at a decent level of depth, in my opinion. And it often comes down to, well, it really depends on what you mean by a wage gap, right? Are we adjusting for different factors and considerations, or are we just blindly looking at what all men are paid and what all women are paid and comparing, apples and oranges here? Because oftentimes there's different levels of experience. There may be different priorities in regards to how one looks at their career and their desire to, accumulate wealth, to get the highest paying job, things of that nature. And this seems like CBC News starting out with a headline that they knew they wanted to prove and then trying to find someone to back them up. I'm definitely a big critic of CBC News here in Canada. In fact, I would love to see, the 1.6 billion I think we sent them over the last year and a half. I think that we could probably find better uses for that in Canada, particularly when it's this kind of, I don't know, it feels very politicized.
Well,
And I don't think there's enough facts here to back up this claim, in my opinion.
Well, and I think in order to make this claim, right, we would probably have to even define what radicalism is. Like, what is radicalization, and how are we showing that by, sexist tones and how this one individual thinks? Like, I really don't think that they've substantiated the claim they're making here, that there even is a slippery slope. I mean, that's the headline. And then what is online radicalization, and how do we define that? And if it's measurable, like, what tools are we using to measure this gentleman's perspective? Another kind of thought that I've had here, just as I'm kind of recalling some of Ben Shapiro's content, I believe it's his opinion that, like, men and women just simply aren't actually the same and have different preferences and have different preferences for their for work. I mean, we just don't often choose the same things. There are industries that are predominantly male, and there are industries that are predominantly female. And I believe, recalling his arguments, that that's neither a good or a bad thing. That just simply is a matter of personal preference. And of course, those different industries will have different characteristics, like what wage and salary is an industry standard in those cases.
Mhm.
So I don't think that that's inherently sexist either. I think it's mostly a matter of personal preference. And so I really don't understand how we're measuring radicalization in this argument or in this article. And so, just even starting there, I think would be a better place. If I was CBC, I would want to define what that means.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, encourage you guys do a deep dive into this article. Later on in the article, they do bring on some specialists, but I guess I have a natural bias to assume these individuals are biased in and of themselves because if your job is to find, young men being radicalized by Ben Shapiro, well, I think that that's the conclusion you're going to come to is that young men are being radicalized by Ben Shapiro. Recently, the comedian Ryan Long had a great little bit I saw going viral where he was out, I think, protesting or like pretending to protest, culture jamming here, and interviewing people and asking them if we should do something to fix the wage gap on OnlyFans. Because it turns out on OnlyFans, women dominate the earnings, whereas men barely scratch the surface. And so essentially, he's going out doing man on the street interviews and asking, should we be doing something? Should we be trying to give men a leg up on OnlyFans in order to allow them to get to, wage parity with the females on the platform? Uh, Obviously, I hope that every single person takes that as the joke it was intended as. I don't think that we need to worry about those things, but it's hard for me to not think that oftentimes people with good intentions are walking around with a tool, let's call it a hammer, and in order to justify having that hammer, they're going to assume that anything and everything is a nail, right? It's an end to the means of their tool. So just food for thought there.
Agreed. And a super popular similar argument is that with the argument in men and women's sports. Men simply draw bigger crowds, which draws more advertisement dollars, which drives higher salaries. And that just simply is kind of how the math works out. And I think the same argument is often made about why women or female athletes should be paid as much as their male counterparts. And it's just simply not how the compensation of that industry is played out. It's played out by how many eyes are watching the stream or how many eyes are consuming that particular event, either in real life or through online streaming sites. And that's just how they're paid. I mean, you can't possibly argue that they should all be paid the same if the way they're paid is completely different based on how many people are viewing the stream at one time or at the in-person event.
Yeah, it's really hard to hide the facts when it comes to sports because it's such a clear-cut meritocracy in most cases, right? Most sports, it's very clear, the more skilled you are, the more like physically set up for that sport, right? Again, each sport's going to be a little bit different, but certainly it's a meritocracy where you can't necessarily hide behind the concept, at least in my opinion, that, oh, people were groomed or conditioned to think that they can't play the sport and that's why they're bad at it. And there's no physical realities there that need to be taken into consideration. In fact, Jesse Signal had a great episode recently on Blocked and Reported where they kind of did a deep dive into the subject matter. So encourage anyone that wants to go further down that rabbit hole of women and men's sports and the transgender issue that we see constantly coming up in pop culture these days. I think they do a great deep dive into that subject matter. So encourage you guys to go look at that. But we're going to transition here, move on to the next story. So this is from Sam Cooper. He's the author I mentioned earlier on in the show. He wrote Willful Blindness. It's in the top 3 of the books I've given the most copies away of because I think it's so important that particularly Canadians, but also this is playing out across North America. It's just particularly atrocious, I guess I'll say, in Canada, particularly in Vancouver. But let's get into it. So how Fentanyl Cash is converted to Vancouver real estate. Home seized as collateral from drug cash borrowers. Property bought with cash through dirty lawyers, realtors. Loan sharks sell seized homes into real estate investment companies, which build and invest Vancouver real estate developments. And essentially, Sam Cooper here is saying that FinTrack is willful blindness or willfully blind to all that's playing out here. And he does an excellent job of exploring it in his book, Willful Blindness. So again, really encourage you guys to check it out. We won't spend a lot of time here looking at the FinTrack Vancouver model, but this is literally from FinTrack here in Canada, and it just breaks down how essentially cash from illegal drugs, particularly fentanyl, with the Chinese triad, is able to be brought into the Canadian economy through Vancouver real estate. And honestly, as you read the book Willful Blindness, it's just mind-boggling the degree that this is playing out here in Canada, particularly in Vancouver, as well as the greater Toronto area. I know back in 2016, 2017, when I started really focusing on creating Canadian real estate content, a lot of people would ask me about this. And I guess I was willfully blind to it as well, where I just had no idea it was playing out. I'd heard rumors a little bit about Vancouver and Victoria and things of that nature, but I'd never spent the time or research. And I'm really grateful that Sam Cooper is doing such a great job of exploring this, because it's something that you won't find often talked about in Canadian mainstream media. And yet there's actually serious consequences here, right? And I think that, if you want to go down a rabbit hole in the subject matter, reverse or Google the reverse opiate wars. And that's kind of arguably what's playing out. And that's a big part of Sam Cooper's argument in his book. So I know that you probably didn't have a lot of time to study the Vancouver model here, Adam, but you have read Willful Blindness. What were maybe some of your big takeaways in regards to that book?
Well, one of the more shocking things that I think caught me off guard immediately was the idea that, some of these people are walking through Vancouver into casinos, into real establishments with like hockey bags of cash, right? Like
Yeah.
inordinate amounts of cash. And that's kind of when we're looking at that infographic you just shared. I mean, that's obviously the basis of how the model works. You need a cash business. But of course, like, any law abiding citizen or anybody that's run a business will know that like cash is actually a pretty hard to manage thing, especially en masse. I mean, if you walk into the bank right now with any more than a few $1,000s, they're for sure going to be asking you questions, right? If you get over that 10K mark, it starts triggering notes and FinTrack and things like that. So to hear, right, well documented examples of these people walking into casinos with hockey bags of cash and walking out with like chips and
Clean
everything
bills.
else with
Yeah.
clean bills, like that to me is absolutely wild. I mean, that should be shocking to everybody because, if you're like me and you've run businesses and you've paid a lot of money in taxes, this is certainly not a fair game, right? If you look at what's going on here, this is not fair at all. And of course, this has downstream effects on everybody that lives in not only Vancouver, but everywhere else surrounding it. I'm not a Vancouver real estate expert, but I would at this point claim that I'm something of an expert, at least in Ontario's real estate. And I know for sure that when prices exponentially climb in Toronto, we see an overflow and a spill out to the neighboring cities, right? So I'm thinking Kitchener, Waterloo. I'm thinking Hamilton and the Golden Horseshoe there. I'm thinking all the way down the 401, even all the way down here to London, Sarnia and Windsor. I mean, these things are all connected. If your main cities get very expensive, too expensive to live, people have to go. They have to move somewhere else. And that raises the price of real estate everywhere for everybody. And, regardless of whether or not you think that's a bad thing, it's certainly not a fair thing if they're doing it with pre-tax dollars, right? They're not playing the same game everybody else is forced to play. So I think one of the things that they've tried to combat this with is a foreign investor tax. But again, like taxes, I don't think actually solve the root problem here.
Well, and I think taxes are a band-aid solution that sound good in theory, right? But it's not actually treating the underlying issues. There's a level of sophistication here where these individuals will work around those sort of restrictions you
Yeah.
create. And so you're not actually getting to the root of the problem in this regards. And again, it's much larger than I think the average Canadian would realize unless you've spent the time and actually read Sam Cooper's book on it. And just for perspective, for anyone that's watching this, like he's not some crazy conspiracy theorist, right? He was a global news reporter, right? He came through mainstream media and he ended up just like dipping a toe into these stories. And then all of a sudden he realized there's a giant ball of wax to be unraveled here. And he just kept pulling at different threads. And it's wild, like literally to the point at one of the chapters of Willful Blindness, he talks about how the Canadian CSIS is so disrespected amongst the Five Eyes allies, right? Which is Canada, the US, the United Kingdom, Australia, and New Zealand. That when the Five Eyes would be looking to crack down on Chinese money launderers, they would prefer to arrest them in Europe than in Canada out of fear that the Canadian intelligence agency would somehow have that information leaked. And again, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Really encourage you guys, spend the time, spend the money, go down the rabbit hole because just far too many Canadians are completely unaware of what's playing out here. And this needs to be a much bigger talking point because if this goes untreated, it's only going to get worse, right? And not only is this just like, oh, they're avoiding taxes and they're laundering money and yada, yada, yada. Understand that it's a lot of violent, illegal activities, as well as the fentanyl trade, which right now, like overdoses, are the leading cause of death in America for individuals between, I think, 18 and 49. Joe Rogan talks about this all the time. And again, a big part of that is from Chinese fentanyl that's coming in through Vancouver's real estate ports. Then essentially they're trading that with the Mexican cartels. And right now, the triad is actually laundering money for the cartels as well through some of those Canadian casinos and real estate money laundering schemes, particularly the Richmond casino. That, like, again, he explores it at length in Willful Blindness, but it's wild when you start to really go down the rabbit hole on this subject matter. So,
Well, and sorry, just one more point before we move on, because I think it's important. And I don't remember the exact details, but I do remember that in the book, he actually makes allegations as well against Canadian senators, like high up people in
yes.
Canadian politics. So, like, you know, regardless of your stance on whether or not they're paying taxes on this money, which they clearly aren't, regardless of your position on whether or not people recreationally use drugs, he's also alleging that the Canadian, like, while people high up in Canadian government are, participants in this. So I think, read the book. I mean, I'm not going to be able to spill the whole thing out here, but it's a thick read. I'm not going to lie. It wasn't an easy read because it's pretty dense material, but this is well researched. I mean, to me, it read as a book that was incredibly well researched.
Like, it should absolutely become a Netflix series, right? Like, I could see a dramatization of it, which would be wild because, like, there are gun shootouts in Vancouver over this, right? And, like, big raids of illegal casinos in Toronto and the GTA suburbs and things of that nature. But yeah, we'll keep rolling here. We're going to roll on to our fourth story, which this one actually is interesting because it wasn't even on my radar. I think a lot of us have heard about potential energy crisis this winter in Europe, right? We're seeing stories, whether they're anecdotal stories or edge case, or maybe they're representative of a bigger issue, but you'll hear about someone's, energy bill in the UK or Spain or France or Germany, increasing not by like 10 or 20%, not even by 100%, but sometimes 4, 5, 7 time increases in regards to the amount that they're paying for energy right now, electricity in particular. And this obviously has to do with the Ukraine conflict going on between Ukraine and Russia. There's a lot to unpack there. We're not going to really get into that in this show, but maybe we'll do a deep dive in future shows. But one thing that wasn't on my radar whatsoever, and this originally started off as a Reuters article, but I picked it up from Zero Hedge, gone in 30 minutes, next on Europe's doomsday list, collapse of cell phone networks. And now, at first, I was like, "Oh, this is going to be, some sort of like, fear mongering that Tyler Durden from Zero Hedge is doing here." But no, it turns out that actually, like, France and other European countries have legitimate concerns about their telecommunications networks because it turns out those actually use energy as well. So if you start to have blackouts or rolling blackouts or down periods when it comes to your energy infrastructure, well, it turns out that these telecommunication, these cell phone towers, they only have 30-minute backup power in most cases. Now, some European countries are looking to upgrade they're looking to upgrade the battery life and things of that nature. But again, this all feels like it's a band-aid being slapped onto a much bigger issue. And I kind of want to use this just as a jumping off point and talk about in general all the unintended consequences that we're seeing play out right now because of the Ukraine and Russia conflict. The energy crisis is a very obvious one, but beyond that, we've seen all sorts of stories about, there was a story that I read in Poland where people in Poland were waiting in line for multiple days to fill their trunks with coal out of fear that, this winter there were going to be energy blackouts and they were going to need some way to heat their home because while Poland's maybe not quite northern Ontario where I live, it still gets very cold there as well. There's anecdotal stories of people talking about wood being the new gold in Germany. And certainly we're seeing a lot of people moving towards alternative energy sources, particularly when it comes to heating their homes, out of fear that the European grid won't be able to sustain the level of consumption that previously they were used to. So I guess just in general, Adam, anywhere you want to jump in, what are your thoughts on all this going on with the energy crisis in Europe?
Yeah, well, I think this is particularly unsettling, and one of the reasons for this, and you brought this up to me yesterday, and I was genuinely shocked. I was like, "Oh man, I never thought about that," because usually when your power goes out, it's a local event, right? Your power may go out in your house, but generally speaking, your cell phone stays up because wherever the cell phone towers are and that network, they're generally still powered. One of the things that is horrifying about what you're telling me right now is that it's not well known. Okay. So when you see people panic buying coal to heat their houses, panic buying, we saw panic buys on toilet paper and stuff like that here. Whenever people are uncertain, whenever people are panicking, they often do like reasonably irrational stuff like hoarding resources, and, they'll rush to the grocery store to buy that last roll of toilet paper or that last amount of, maybe beef or something that they don't have in the freezer. I think that this issue is particularly unsettling because I don't think it's well known. I don't think that everybody really understands this. And so I think there could be a lot of social consequences to the entire cell phone network going down at once with no heads up. Okay. Imagine you're at work, your kid is at daycare, right? You're at work, your spouse is at the hospital or somewhere else. Maybe they're traveling, they're on a road trip or something. Any example of where you're not actually at your home base with your whole family unit and everybody that you care about, their location, that they're safe, things can escalate pretty quickly. I mean, there's people that are going to irrationally want to get places quickly to make sure that their loved ones are okay. And that's going to cause all sorts of chaos. So one thing that we experienced here in Canada was Rogers network recently went down. Okay. So the Rogers network just absolutely disappeared with no warning. Well, what ended up happening? Well, I'll tell you what ended up happening. Security systems went down. The 911, so our emergency network here, went down. There was no 911 calls coming through the Rogers network at all. So people who were having heart attacks, car accidents, seizures, strokes, whatever, you name it, they weren't getting responded to. So security, 911 went down. People's businesses were instantly disrupted, right? I work online, generally speaking. So all of your online business was shut down. The ATMs and point of sale systems were not working because they also connect to the internet. Like, these things are not something we talk about a lot, but have great impacts if we're not prepared for them. And I think what you're telling me now is particularly disturbing because we're not prepared for that, right? Nobody here was ready for that in Canada. And a lot of other systems as well. I don't want to go full Y2K on us, but a lot of systems rely on internet connection to properly function. And that includes medical systems. And again, like the emergency system, there's so much stuff that runs on the internet and is predicated by having that service be available. So I think there's issues here, man. And
Yeah,
I also don't have a solution.
before reading this article, had you asked me like, what about blackout, Matt? I would have said to you point blank, well, I've got a generator here at the Citadel. I usually keep my cell phone charged, a decent amount anyways. So I can charge it based upon the generator. I've got one of those little converters you can put in the truck and power things off of. I would have said like, I'm good. I can charge up my cell phone, so I'll be able to talk to people. But you never think about like, no, like in a real blackout, a large area blackout, those cell phone towers are going down. If the power's out for more than 30 minutes, you're going to start to have connection issues. And yeah, it's just one of those things that was on my radar whatsoever. Now, I don't think you need to go full doomsday prepper in regards to getting ready for this, but I think one thing just be aware of, right? Similar to what Adam was saying, if we did see a large scale blackout, you're going to have issues trying to buy anything unless it's with cash. So again, that argument for an emergency fund, I think, becomes more and more justifiable the further you start to just really pay attention what's going on in the macro news cycle. But beyond that, if you really want to be prepared, maybe you want to look at getting like a CB radio, right? Or maybe you just want to have like a radio that's an old school radio, because I think a lot of us would be like, oh, I'll just like get a radio station on my cell phone if the power goes out or whatever. But again, you're not going to be able to do that on like your typical cell phone. So that old analog radio that just plugs into the wall, or one of those hand crank ones where you can actually self-power it. If you're concerned about emergencies, right? Like if I was in Central Europe right now, I probably would want one of those hand crank radios. I probably would want a CB radio. Now, again, that's because I'm coming from a certain financial position. This wouldn't be me spending my life savings on those assets. This would just be, a immaterial expense that I'd be taking on. but I think it's reasonable for people to be asking themselves these things, right? And your level of preparedness doesn't have to necessarily compare or compete with someone else. You can just literally look at improving where you're at, right? Right now, maybe your fridge is completely empty, you've got nothing in the pantry. Well, why not have like a week's worth of food, right? And we can take these small steps, these incremental improvements. And again, that's a big part of what BDE is all about.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to have the best day ever, too, one of the simplest places to look is who you're sharing it with. And I think that's another place to start here as well for a low cost, but potentially really high impact step you can take would be to improve your network. I mean, who are your neighbors? Do they have resources that you could potentially share? Do they have resources that you need? Do you have resources that they need? Because also you want to be aware of that in a situation where if things are truly going bad, you do want to protect yourself and your family unit and those closest to you in your circle. So perhaps, not advertising your excessive food storage is also a decent angle to take on this. But you will want to improve your network. I mean, having friends, having allies that live nearby you and that can closely assist you with what you need in one of these situations is important, and it's very inexpensive. I mean, this is the cost of networking is almost free. You have to put in some time and maybe some effort, but it probably will pay off if you have a plan.
Yeah, absolutely. For a episode we're going to be doing in the future next week, I've been, researching and reading up on the fourth turning. And one of the pieces of research I was doing in order to get familiar with like all the details of it was an interview with one of the authors. It was Neil Howe and Tony Robbins, and they kind of explored some of these things. And one of the biggest takeaways that Neil Howe tried to instill on Tony Robbins' audience was local networks, right? They're so much more valuable than a lot of us realize, and part of it's because we live in such a digital age where we're fully connected to everyone and everything. But again, it's actually very valuable for you to know who your neighbors are, to have some social capital built up with those individuals. So really encourage you guys to at least consider going down that rabbit hole of preparing by building out your local network. But that's kind of it for this morning show, the Current News Affairs show. We will be having a second half to the show where we're going to be jumping into SMART goals. We're going to be exploring the importance of SMART goals. We're also going to break down an example for you guys that Adam and I often saw amongst real estate investors that, they decide they want to get into real estate investing because they want to be rich or they want to have excess money, but they never actually sit down and build out serious goals. And because of that, they struggle to take action, right? There's so many people that struggle with that analysis paralysis in every aspect of life, but particularly I think people are prone to it when it comes to money, when it comes to their physical health, when it comes to even just like building relationships with loved ones and things of that nature. If you're not actively managing these things, if you're not actively tracking these things, if you're not setting goals for yourself, it's really easy to become complacent and essentially make no progress in that regards. So again, we just really appreciate you guys joining us for this first episode. If you're watching this live or on a replay, leave us a comment, give us some feedback. Again, this is episode number 1. We're going to be here for a long time. We're really excited to be creating this content, but we absolutely want this to become a two-way conversation. So if you guys want to share your thoughts, your opinions on the stories we talked about today, or maybe some other stories we didn't have a chance to cover, jump into the Telegram group. I think that's going to be one of the best ways to communicate with Adam and myself. Anything else you want to touch upon, Adam?
No, I'm just really excited to jump into SMART goals. I know it's a particularly important place to start. I mean, starting with the end in mind is obviously a fantastic place to start. So let's move on to our SMART goals.
Awesome. Yeah. And just before we do that, I know we started off the show talking about new habits. One of the things I thought I'd leave with you guys as a quick tip is when it comes to implementing new habits, one of the things I find to really help me or aid me in that capacity is like pattern interrupts. So, maybe you're trying to eat healthier, maybe you're trying to curb mindless eating. One of the things that I used to do is I would literally like take a piece of like masking tape or painter's tape and put that on the door handle to my fridge. And I'm not used to seeing that on the door handle of my fridge. And so like whenever I just like go to open up the fridge just to look what's in it, it would be like, wait, why am I doing this? Right. It's just one of those little things that you can do to try and make yourself more conscious of your day-to-day actions, right? And I think a lot of us struggle where we get into these routines, or at least I know I do, and you end up just in this robotic mode of just like rinse, repeat. This is what I did yesterday. This is what I'm going to do today. So really encourage you guys, if you're trying to implement some new habits like Adam and myself were talking about earlier in the show, consider creating some sort of symbolism for it, right? Some sort of pattern interrupt. Maybe that's taking that goal and putting it on your bathroom mirror, right? Maybe it's, writing or journaling every single day and getting into that habit of just being more cognizant of what your day-to-day life looks like. Really encourage you guys to do all that stuff. And again, we just really appreciate you guys watching this first episode. I think we're going to go into like a 2-minute little break here, and then we'll jump into SMART goals. And yeah, thanks, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate you all being here. And just something we've mentioned a few times already in the show, and I'll leave you with this, is that we have actually set up a Substack where you guys will be able to see our research. You'll be able to see our show notes. So if you want to go over there, drop a comment for us and contribute to the shows, that's where you're going to be able to best do it. So the link for the Substack is actually in the description below, and you can jump over there at any time. But we'll see you back here in a couple minutes.
They say life is what you make it. So what happens if you actually try? What if you actually tried to get your mind right? What if you actually tried to live the high life? What if you happen to die cause life is finite? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? What if you actually tried to get your mind right? What if you actually tried to live the high life? What if you happen to die cause life is finite? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? What if you actually grind out when the time's right? What if you actually blinded by your hindsight? What if you actually find out what defines life? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? I'm getting 1% better every day. I'm getting 1% better every way. I'm waking up every day to a sunny day, no matter what the weather say. Life is like a record, so just let it play. Educate, motivate, entertain and demonstrate. Health, wealth, relationships and legacy we elevate. Every day is what you make it, so don't take it and waste it. Never too late to save it, remember roses grow from pavement. Let me break this down in layman's, just wanna live outrageous. Build my way to greatness, gotta speak my truth and face it. Hear the basis lies, gotta challenge it and break it. Take a shot of truth, chase it with some motivation. The best day ever, the best day ever. We gon' squad up, have the best day together. Best day ever, best day ever. We gon' squad up, go harder than any weather. What if you actually tried to get your mind right? What if you actually tried to live the high life? What if you happen to die cause life is finite? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? What if you actually tried to get your mind right? What if you actually tried to live the high life? What if you happen to die cause life is finite? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? What if you actually grind out when the time's right? What if you actually blinded by your hindsight? What if you actually find out what defines life? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? I'm getting 1% better every day. I'm getting 1% better every way. I'm waking up every day to a sunny day, no matter what the weather say. Life is like a record, so just let it play. Best Day Ever Media. Song by Dan the Lost Boy.
All right, and we are back. I hope you guys enjoyed that little countdown. Little FYI, in case you didn't realize it, that photo there is actually just from my deck at the Citadel. I got up really early one morning to do a time lapse of the morning sunrise, and that literally is with no filter. So again, that definitely makes me think of the best day ever. Is just those sort of morning sunrises.
I love it. I love the transition through the various colors in there, like as the reds and oranges pop up and the sun comes up over the island. Like, man, I'm excited actually. For anybody that has been following us, you'll know that Matt and I have lived together in the past, and it sounds like we're about to live together again. So we're going to get another shot, another time lapse for you of the winter season there, because that's part of the best day ever too. I mean, the sun's got to set eventually.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we're going to be talking about everything SMART goals here. I'll maybe get us started and then hand it off to Adam. But for anyone that's unfamiliar with SMART goals, it's a very simple concept, and yet something I think a lot of us struggle with, right? So, you know, the old classic tale of individuals wanting to lose 10 pounds at the start of the new year, or the person that wants to learn a new language, or they want to increase their earning capacity, start a side hustle, get into real estate investing. It doesn't really matter what the endeavor you're looking to undertake is. If you don't have a roadmap, if you don't have very clear cut steps for yourself to take action upon, it's really easy just to get caught up in analysis paralysis, right? To feel completely lost, completely untethered, unmoored, and it's really easy to lose motivation when you find yourself in those situations. So high level, when we're talking about SMART goals, and there's a couple different ways people like to explain it, but the version I like is SMART as in specific. Then we've got measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-based. And so those are the 5 key aspects of any SMART goal. And if you really want to succeed when it comes to undertaking a new endeavor, you need to build out SMART goal. So when thinking about specific, what I'd like to kind of ask myself is, what do you want to do? Right? So what is it that we're actually looking to try and accomplish? Then when diving into measurable, we're thinking about things like, how will I know that I've reached it or I've achieved it? And then when we're getting into achievable, is it in your power to finish it? And we'll go through examples of all this in a little bit. Then the R is realistic. So can you realistically achieve it? And then finally, we've got T, which is time-based. So when exactly do you want to accomplish it? And all 5 of these facets are important when considering or when looking to implement a goal or an undertaking. So we'll pull up a screen share here in a second. We've got some great graphics for you guys, and these graphics are from a previous e-guide or ebook that I've created. So if you end up wanting a copy of this, or you want to follow along after this video is aired, definitely encourage you. Right now, it's at mattmckeever.com. You can grab it there, but we'll also be sharing copies of it in the Telegram group as well as on Substack. So there'll be lots of ways for you guys to grab this information. But again, I just find it so important for anyone looking to implement a goal to get down into the details. And I guess personally talking, when I originally started thinking about real estate investing, it actually started in my 4th year of university. So back then, myself and a buddy and a roommate of mine, Jake, we both knew that we probably didn't want to just be office drones, working that white collar lifestyle, trying to work your way up to the corner office. We really knew that the reason we had joined business school wasn't to become accountants or marketing managers, but was because we wanted to get rich. We wanted to have a lot of money. And yet we had no idea how we were actually going to go about accomplishing that. And the way it started off for us was literally us just kind of spitballing in our room and discussing, well, how do you get rich? And as we kind of like bantered back and forth, I finally just said to Jake, like, hey, your dad's rich. He owns like this tire factory and yada, yada, yada. Maybe he's got some suggestions for us. And he shared with us a book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I'm a huge fanboy of that book. If you're brand new to personal finance, I think it's a book that can completely change your life. I know that it really sped up the trajectory for myself. However, there was still actually a really long period between when I read that book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, in 4th year university, and when I ended up actually buying my first property. In fact, I think there was about a 3 or 4 year gap there in regards to when I actually finally pulled the trigger. And I personally, when I look back now with hindsight, I know the biggest reason that I didn't get into real estate investing and didn't start making money with real estate earlier was because I didn't have a SMART goal. So I simply was like, okay, I read this book. It's got me hyped up. I'm really excited. I'm going to buy some real estate. And then I was like, I guess I'll just wait for the perfect deal to fall into my lap. And that's literally how the next couple of years played out, was me reading a bunch more, joining some internet communities, some bulletin boards, and, reading some blogs and getting active in those comment sections. But I still wasn't actually pulling the trigger because I'd never sat down and just created a specific goal, right? It was just this idea of get rich with real estate investing. And Adam, I know that's something you've probably seen a few times as well.
Yeah, no, and I think it is actually a really dangerous mindset, because something that I constantly heard and probably even started out with was this idea that like, oh, I want to be a millionaire, right? I want to make $1 million or something like that, or I want to get rich, or I want to have, some number of buildings or doors, but then not having any actual reason or grounding as to why I would want that specific number of doors, or, to have $1 million or anything like that. Or having actually spent the time trying to dissect what it would take in order to have $1 million of equity in a real estate portfolio or a monthly recurring revenue, right? And I think that's where people, I think, fall into these weird little ruts, is they think, oh, well, I want to have $20,000 of monthly income, let's say. And then they don't actually ever think about what would be necessary in order to get to that dollar figure. And then I think what ends up happening a lot of the time is the mountain looks really big when you're standing at the bottom of it. And the 20K or that $1 million climb can seem impossible if we don't break it down into smaller, more measurable steps. And that's where I think the SMART system, or the idea of specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, time-based goals, becomes really important to be able to see the end and break it down. And I get it. I mean, it was hard for me as well. I come from a background where I always wanted a lot of things, but hadn't had the definition around it. And part of that, Matt, was the concept that I just really didn't have a lot of people around me in my life to benchmark, right? I didn't see people like, you know, your friend had his uncle. I didn't really have a lot of that around me. And so I just knew I wanted to get rich. But I never really took the time to think about it. And it was after I made some big mistakes, like buying the sports car, because that's what rich people have, right? Buying the expensive clothes, because that's what rich people have. It was after I did those things that I realized that, wow, this might actually take a little bit more than I was thinking and take a more procedural approach. So if you're ready, Matt, I'll actually bring up the graphic that we have here to go over, and we can jump right in.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to build upon even my backstory a little bit more with SMART goals, again, like I said, last year at university, wanted to get into real estate investing, but didn't end up doing it until I turned 25. And one of the big facets there, and unfortunately, I wasn't thinking through the lens of SMART goals, but I finally did start to realize that I need to get more into the details in order to like finally have the balls to take action. Because up until essentially when I committed to buying real estate and taking it seriously through, you know, kind of my version of SMART goals, I'd only made one offer on a piece of real estate, and that was when I was like 23 or 24. I was scared shitless, and you know, the moment they said I didn't win the bidding war, I was just like, oh, thank God. That was so scary. I don't know what I would have done had I somehow won it either. However, you know, when I turned 25, I can remember I was at like a house party and we were just kind of hanging out, chatting with a large group of friends. And people were constantly kind of, you know, making fun or chirping me a little bit, egging me on, because they're like, Matt's always talking about real estate investing. He's always talking about like stocks, you know, drip portfolios, all these things. He's eventually either going to be really rich or he's going to do nothing with it. And I finally decided, like, they were kind of right. You know, I've been talking about this stuff for a really long time. I was very passionate and into it, and yet I hadn't taken any action. So at age 25, I actually downloaded an app on my phone that would count down until I turned 35. So 10 years from then. And I just made a commitment to, in front of everyone at that party, I was like, okay, I forget the number now, but like in 3,100 days, I'm going to be retired because of real estate investing. And that was a step in the right direction because it was getting a little bit more specific. But as you mentioned earlier, Adam, a lot of people, you know, they think they're getting specific when they're like, I want $20,000 a month because that amount of money sounds good. But one of the reasons that they struggle to never actually go through and execute it is because they never look at it through this lens of SMART goals and getting into the details, right? So not only is the specifics of $20,000 a month not enough, but oftentimes people aren't even specific with why they want these things, right? If you're not actually passionate, if you don't understand why you'd be willing to, you know, put in the extra effort, why you'd be willing to go the extra mile, you'll end up just, again, in that analysis paralysis. So let's get a little bit deeper into SMART goals specifically here. So when looking at SMART goals, one of the things I like to really focus on is, you know, with specific, your goal needs to be clear and specific. And so when thinking about that, we'll actually jump to the second page here, Adam, is let's just go through this list of questions. I find it very useful when trying to actually get down to the bottom of what a SMART goal is. So specific, who is involved? So in my case, with building a real estate portfolio, it was me. And that's really the only person I need to count on. What do I want to specifically accomplish? And so in my case, it was retire from my day job as an accountant because of real estate investing. And then we can get into more details in a second, but even that detail isn't enough. So what amount of money do I actually need in order to retire? That's a big part of that, right? So again, just wanting to get rich isn't nearly specific enough. You need to get into the details. So for myself, I started off by tracking my monthly expenses. And I figured out, hey, you know what? If I'm house hacking, so living in a house I bought and renting out some rooms, and essentially that house is paying for itself, I really only needed like $2,000 or $3,000 a month to be able to maintain my current lifestyle. And I didn't think I was really living an impoverished lifestyle. So if I could maintain my existing quality of life, I was actually going to be really happy with it. So all of a sudden, I went from, I want to get rich with real estate to then refining it a little bit further and realizing, okay, well, not get rich necessarily, but I want to be able to quit my day job and retire from the corporate world because of real estate investing. Well, in order to retire, I'm going to need about $3,000 a month in passive cash flow. And again, this is how we start to really get into the details and the specifics here. So for myself, again, it was not just make $3,000 a month from real estate, but I need to be able to actually spend that money, right? And so there's a big difference there between maybe equity you're building when it comes to real estate investing and cash flow, cash that you can actually put in your pocket and spend on your lifestyle in my case. Then where is it located? So again, for myself at first, I was like, I'll buy real estate anywhere. But that ended up just being too broad. And I need to really narrow in and get focused. And I decided, okay, London, Ontario. This is kind of the big city when I was growing up. It was the city I was most familiar with. I was working in that city as well. So I figured it would be easiest for me to develop a competitive advantage in that market, and I could really hone in. But with time, again, I struggled at first to pull the trigger, and I realized, I need to get even more specific. I'm going to do student rentals because, hey, I just graduated university. I know my landlord was making good money off the student rental that she owned. I suspect that there's a reason people are willing to put up with the pain in the ass factor that is a student rental. And oftentimes, student rentals can be a pain in the ass factor, particularly if you're investing in like college towns like I was. So, like London, Ontario, near Fanshawe College. And again, the more I started like pushing myself to get into the details, the easier this became. Because all of a sudden I went from like, I don't know, I want to get rich because of real estate. Maybe I'll buy some apartment buildings or a commercial plaza or a student rental to, hey, I'm going to look at just student rentals near Fanshawe College that make a certain cash flow because I know that I need to accumulate these assets in order to generate that $3,000 a month in cash flow that I want in order to quit my job. So why is the goal important is another important aspect of the specific here. And for me, I didn't really like being a CPA. There's nothing wrong with it. And if you love being a CPA, awesome, you do you. However, I don't think I was designed to solely crunch numbers for the rest of my life. So I want to go deeper down that rabbit hole of financial independence and really just focus on setting myself up where I could choose to work. And that was a really important aspect to my approach to retirement. And then which resources or limits are involved. So in my case, what are some of the restrictions that I might face that might hold me back when it comes to becoming a real estate investor? Then moving on to measurable, how much? How much money do I actually want to make per month, right? How many properties do I need when it comes to building out that portfolio of cash flowing rentals? How will I know when it's accomplished? And then finally, how do I know I won? And in my case, it was very clear. Am I making $3,000 a month in relatively passive cash flow? If that's the case, well then, hey, I've gone past the marker I set for myself. I know that I've won the game that I set out to do, and that I'll have hit the specific goal I wanted. And then moving on to the A, achievable. Is it within my control to accomplish this goal? So yeah, it was completely within my scope to be able to control whether I actually executed and built up a real estate portfolio and was able to retire from that. However, there's other goals that you maybe can't necessarily control. Maybe you want to, marry a celebrity. Well, that's actually a two-way street, and they need to opt into that situation versus simply you being completely in control of it, right? And again, oftentimes people struggle with this where because they're not getting specific, because they're not getting measurable, it's hard for them to determine whether it's actually achievable, whether it's within their control. So again, getting rich with real estate, well, some people have got rich with real estate, but am I able to do it? How am I going to do it? Those are the struggles that so many people find themselves when approaching SMART goals. Do I have the resources and capabilities to achieve the goal? Have others done it before? And that's a big aspect too, right? So, going to Mars is going to be a much more difficult SMART goal than necessarily building up a cash flowing real estate portfolio. The way I know that, well, no one's actually gone to Mars. But lots of people have previously come before me and been able to build up cash flow in real estate portfolios. And that makes it so much more achievable for you, right? And the reason that's important is, you know, the idea of the 4 minute mile. And so for the longest time, people thought it was impossible to run a 4 minute mile because no one had done it before. But it turns out that the moment that happened, the moment the first 4 minute mile was ran, within a couple of years, multiple people were able to run that 4 minute mile. And the reason was they had someone as a pace setter, right? They could look towards someone and realize, hey, if that guy did it, if that person's done it, I can do it as well. And if you haven't sat down and looked at whether your goal has been achieved by others, it's going to be very difficult for the average person to buy into the belief that they're going to be capable of executing and achieving that goal. Then moving on to realistic, do you believe this goal is possible? Do you believe enough in your why that you'll put in the work to achieve this goal? So again, if you don't believe it's possible, if you don't believe it's realistic, are you really going to wake up early to put in the effort, right? Are you going to stay up late? Are you going to go the extra mile? Are you willing to potentially make certain sacrifices in order to make sure on the other side of that, you achieve your goal? And I know that for the average person, sometimes even just going through this exercise can seem overwhelming, but understand it's an iterative process, and we'll explore that in a little bit here. But finally, timely. So do you have timelines? Do you have due dates? If you don't have due dates, but you're specific, you're measurable, you're achievable and realistic, it's really easy for you just to never take action because I'll do it tomorrow, right? Or I'll wait until the market changes for a real estate investor, or I'll wait until houses are cheaper, or I'll wait until I know more. But without that catalyst of having a specific timeline, and in my case, it was setting that goal at 35 years of age that I would retire, it would have been really easy for me to be 35 and have not hit it. Where in my case, I set that goal at 25, and it turns out I actually hit it and retired from the corporate world at age 31. And I'm 100% certain, had I not set that 10-year timeline for myself, I would have never achieved the goal of retiring from real estate investing. And when I think back and look back on that, it's just like, oh man, I'm so happy that I kind of accidentally backed into SMART goals in that first case. Later on in my life, I would discover SMART goals and really sink my teeth into it. And now I believe it's just an important facet of anything that I really want to accomplish. So I know I've been going on a little bit of monologue here, but Adam, SMART goals.
Yeah, I mean, there's even a few things I wanted to unpack from your discussion there that I think could be important or useful for people. And one of the things, like right off the bat, I think finishing on timely, I think is very important. I think having a plan is excellent, but having an implementation plan is as important, or even perhaps more important. And I believe it's Peter Drucker who once said, "What gets measured gets managed." And I believe that that's one of the more powerful quotes that you could live by. Now, Matt, one of the things while you were talking that it just kind of popped into my head here is, how did you manage yourself to stay on task with this goal when it was such an individualistic experience? I mean, what you said was that it was fully in your control that you were able to get that number of units, but that means it was also in your control to fail, right? You could have just stopped along the way. So do you have any insights about your journey through your real estate portfolio that kept you on pace, kept you on task to hit that goal?
Yeah. And honestly, with hindsight, I would have even approached it slightly different. And I think I would have accomplished the goal even faster. But the biggest thing when it comes to SMART goals is not falling in love with getting the perfect SMART goal day one, but understanding that this is an iterative process. And I've actually got a different screen share here, Adam, if you don't mind pulling it up. And we'll dive into this concept or the timeline of the evolution of SMART goals. So let's look. Hopefully this is going to work. Okay, sort of work for me. So how SMART goals evolve. To set effective SMART goals, you may need to go through a refinement or evolution process in regards to your goals. So in my case, the very first goal was like get rich with real estate, then quit my day job because of real estate, then make $3,000 a month passively through cash flow from real estate investments. And it turns out that even that wasn't specific enough, right? So as I continue to refine it, I need to refine my investment thesis. And I ended up deciding that student rentals were going to be the primary focus of my investment strategy when I started investing. Now, why did I choose student rentals? Well, I knew I needed to make $3,000 a month cash flow. So that allowed me to go and do more research and be like, well, one, I know that any real estate I buy needs to cash flow, or else it's not going to actually meet the needs of my investment philosophy. Okay, Well, what properties cash flow? And you can quickly join, a handful of online internet forums or communities like Bigger Pockets, Canadian Money Forum. There's lots of great organizations for you guys to check out. But quickly, you'll find that there's certain like rules or rules of thumb that will guide you to make sure that you're getting cash flow positive rental properties, if that's your ultimate goal as an investor. So as I started doing some digging, I realized in my local market that, hey, yeah, student rentals, they actually perform the best when it comes to cash flow. Now, the reason they performed the best in regards to cash flow at that time was they were a little bit riskier, right? They were a little bit more hands-on maintenance. You were maybe going to have, the tenants from hell, the students that trash your rental property, that have a keg party and play volleyball inside it. And yes, that's actually a true story. They played indoor volleyball during a keg party at one of my student rental properties, because it had vaulted ceilings. But anyways, the reason I was willing to take on those potential risks and take on those potential challenges was because I knew it was going to get me the best cash flowing property possible. As I started like diving deeper into some of the constraints and restrictions that I was going to encounter as a real estate investor, I realized that like, hey, it actually takes a decent amount of money, or at least that was my thoughts at the time, based upon traditional research, to buy real estate. I probably won't be able to buy all the properties I want. So I might need to bring on business partners or real estate investors to help me accomplish it. So I essentially started off with the thesis that, hey, I've done my research on the local market. A student rental property by Fanshawe College at that point in time would cash flow maybe about $1,000 a month. And I was like, if I'm going to have a 50-50 partner, that's about like $500 a month in cash flow I'm going to potentially receive. Well, if I need to make $3,000 a month, I'm going to need roughly 6 student rental properties in order to achieve that goal. And again, this is just the refinement process. Step by step, you go through it and you start to realize more and more details, and it becomes more and more achievable. Because now I went from like, I don't know, I guess I need to buy a bunch of real estate to make a bunch of cash flow, to I need to buy 6 student rental properties over the course of 10 years in order to reach my goal. That feels so much more achievable. Now, again, my goals would evolve over time. I maybe decide I want more cash flow, different types of rental properties. Maybe I wanted to also grow my portfolio in different ways through equity gains. But at least I had this fundamental thesis that I could always check back in on and make sure, am I progressing towards that ultimate goal of being able to quit my day job? And so in this ebook, one of the examples we break down for you, and the reason I used the $5,000 a month goal is because so many people have told me throughout my real estate investing career, networking, and coaching experiences that that's kind of like their starter point. I want to make $5,000 a month. That usually will get you close to the median annual income in North America, whether you live in Canada or the United States. That's $60,000 a month. And people are like, yep, that sounds good. I could quit my day job, particularly if I have some free time. Worst case scenario, I could go pick up side jobs or things like that. And the way I've seen this goal evolve for a lot of people is version 1 is I want to quit my job and do absolutely nothing and keep my lifestyle. Version 2 looks like I spend approximately $5,000 a month, so I need to replace that amount. Version 3 is my goal is $5,000 per month in spendable cash flow from passive sources. Version 4, review constraints, review relevant strategies, and market for it. Then number 5 is confirm that strategy, market, and goal all fit. And so just to break that down a little bit again, had I decided that I wanted to buy, high-end condos and rent them out in London, Ontario, real quickly, once I started to analyze those numbers, I realized like, wait, people buying these high-end condos for like $500,000 are actually losing cash flow every month. They're maybe paying off their mortgage, but they're not getting money in their pockets. And that may make sense for certain types of investors with certain investment theses. However, for someone that wants cash flow, that wants to quit their day job as fast as possible, that clearly doesn't make sense for myself or the average real estate investor that I see, or average aspiring real estate investor, I should say, that I would see back in the day. So then finally, step number 6 is reverse engineer goal into very clear milestones. So for myself, again, it's not even enough to say I'm going to buy 6 properties over 10 years, but let's break it out. And I was like, okay. I talked to one business partner of mine, Dave, and I was like, let's buy a student rental every year for 10 years. And that was me trying to build in a certain buffer in case some of my assumptions were wrong. But by being able to build that stretch goal, I felt confident that as long as I execute on that plan, I would get to the other end of it. And I think that that's why so many of us, when it comes to any sort of goal, whether it's learning a new language, whether it's like learning an instrument, whether it's getting in better physical shape, whether it's making more money. A lot of us struggle because we keep our goals very vague. And sometimes the reason we keep them vague, we don't break them down into milestones, is it feels safer. It feels like, well, if I don't get specific, I can't let myself down. I can't fail. And while that's technically true, understand that you're also not going to make any progress. And the ultimate goal here should be continuous improvement, right? Continuously honing in on what's the best goal for you to be setting for yourself in order to achieve the results that you want. Before we move on here, Adam, anything else you want to jump in regards to SMART goals?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one of the things that you mentioned there too was the incorporation of a partner, right? Once you have a partnership formed, or if anybody else can be involved in your goal, and often I really don't believe that a lot of goals are actually truly individual things that you're doing. I think that more often than not, you probably will involve somebody else, whether that's a spouse, a friend, a business partner, maybe a coworker, something like that. A lot of your goals will be tied to other individuals. And I think that part of what makes these goals realistic and achievable is having somebody else in the relationship to help keep you accountable. And that's one of those things where, like, when you looked at your business partner and said, hey, let's buy one of these every year for the next 10 years, you've now involved somebody else that is also thinking about the goal, right? And so it adds this layer of insulation that you can't just quit on yourself now and have that be the end of the goal attainment, right? Now you've got somebody else that's also expecting you to do your part, which could be, in the context of real estate investing, maybe that's raising the capital, maybe that's organizing the contractors, maybe that's bringing the actual skills required to do the renovations in order to do your investing. Somebody else now is going to be holding you accountable. And I think that's a really an extremely powerful part of getting through the S in SMART goals, which is be very specific, right? Who is involved? Who could help you achieve this goal? Who could we actually lean on to get the required skills, capital, time, whatever that may be, in order to help move you forward in this specific goal? So I think that is one of the best places to start, right? Who's got these skills? Who's got that money? Who's got the time? Who can actually help me, or maybe just the experience? Who can help me get where I need to be? And I think that's one of the things that can't be understated here.
Yeah, accountability is massive. And I think it's something that I just kind of accidentally backed into with my goal of retire in 10 years. And the reason was because I just shared it with friends at that party. It was like, it's going to be 3,000 days or whatever until I retire. But what that ended up creating was an opportunity for others to check in with me. So the next time we met at a party, they'd be like, hey, how many days until you're retired now? And it would kind of become a running joke in my peer group. However, that also kind of kept me accountable, because if I hadn't done anything between the last party and this party, it was like, oh, shit, I guess I did just lose 30 days. I just did lose 100 days, or whatever the case may be. And time slowly ticking by. So again, if you can find a way to build in accountability into your SMART goals, I think that that's the secret sauce to making sure you execute well on them. And again, breaking it down into those milestones, right? Buying a property a year, or whatever the case may be, doing 100 push-ups a day, doing X, Y, Z, whatever it is you set out to do, having that accountability built in by ideally having, whether it's a coach, a loved one, or just someone in a peer group that's also focused on improving themselves. By having that accountability, I just think it's so much easier to get that extra little bit of motivation when maybe you're tired, when maybe you're feeling lazy, when maybe you feel like, ooh, it's going to be a stretch to pull off this real estate deal. I really do think that that's a powerful aspect. And I think it's one of the reasons why in like personal development, like coaches are so popular. It's not necessarily that they've got the secret sauce or the silver bullet or the one piece of information that's going to change your life forever, but it's because, one, they're that example, right? They're the first person that ran the 4-minute mile. But beyond that, they're also going to check in with you and be like, hey, have you done what you said you were going to do between now and last week? And if the case is you haven't, well, why haven't you done it? And so again, milestones are so key, because without that, it's really hard to keep yourself accountable or for other people to check in on your progress when it comes to executing on those SMART goals.
Yeah. Another reason I think a coach or somebody else to be involved in your goal, and this might be as simple as sharing your goal like you did with your friends. Another reason I think that's so important is somebody on the outside of your situation is going to have a completely different perspective of what you're going through, right? So if you're in the trenches, you're kind of in the weeds day to day, whether this is in your own personal fitness, whether this is in your business relationships, whether this is in your own romantic relationships or friendships, you are going to have a certain perspective because of the amount of time you spend in your own head thinking about something. And by involving somebody else, they're going to have a completely clear slate. One hack you can do if you're not going to involve anybody else, and we're going to be talking about this on tomorrow's show about sleep, is actually sleeping on something, right? This can help bring more clarity into your goals. So like Matt was saying, with this being an iterative process, I don't think it would be a bad idea to write these SMART goals down, have a sleep on it, and then think about it again and continue thinking about it as you proceed through through the transition of these different stages of your goal. So you're initially going to lay out a goal, have a sleep on it, go back, look at the drawing board, make sure that you actually were able to get enough on that sheet that you have an idea what you're talking about. Then you can potentially share it with somebody else, get their critiques, get their input, and that might give you a fresh perspective. One exercise that Matt introduced me to a long time ago that I find extremely valuable and very helpful for this is Dean Graziosi's 7 Levels Deep, where you can actually go very deep on yourself to experience or at least get a little bit closer. It's very difficult, this exercise, to nail it on the first try, but you can at least get closer to the concept of what is actually motivating you. Like, what is going to drive you, like Matt said, on the early morning or the late night, or that sales call you're scared to make or you're experiencing anxiety about. What's going to push you to make 100 calls today to better your position rather than 2, right? Or 1? Or what's going to get you out of bed when you know you need to be up instead of hitting that snooze button? That why is a crucial part to actually achieving these goals. And again, I think we need to leverage these tools as well as external input if we can, if we're willing to get a little bit closer to our why and get some perspective on where we're actually trying to go. And I do think that there are some challenges here, Matt. Like with SMART goals, one of the challenges that I've noticed, and we've kind of touched on it with the idea that this is iterative, but I do think it's worth mentioning that as you transition through your goals, it's very likely that you're going to experience hedonic adaptation. You're going to experience challenges and honestly problems with scale. And both of those problems are kind of the same thing, really. So personally, hedonic adaptation means that you're going to become accustomed to your new income or your new revenue streams or your new lifestyle that you're incurring. So if you are currently working a job making, say, $3,000 a month, and that was your goal, was to replace it with $3,000 a month of passive, well, inside there's probably a period where you were making $3,000 a month and also now making surplus cash flow from some of your initial purchases. And I think that's where we start thinking, oh, wow, another $500 a month. Maybe I'll go to maybe I'll go to the mall, right? I've been meaning to get some new clothes, or I've been meaning to have this new experience. Maybe it's an expensive concert or something. And all of a sudden you get used to that $500 coming in, and very quickly it can turn out that $500 is really no additional income by the time you've adapted your lifestyle to it. And I think that's a really, really dangerous position for somebody that wants to achieve that goal. I think you're always at risk of hedonic adaptation, where you've got a surplus of income now that you've done the things you said you were going to do, and your lifestyle is catching up to that. Okay, so beware of that. Some habits or tips that you could do to prevent that might be forced savings, right? There's lots of strategies regarding forced savings that will help you to tuck that money away and classify it totally as something different. Okay, there you can automatically split your income in your bank accounts. That's possible to do these days as it comes in. You could separate those passive income sources into totally separate bank accounts that you don't give yourself regular access to. Okay, because I think half of hedonic adaptation is convenience. The same way that we sometimes have sloppy habits when it comes to eating. It's generally speaking about convenience and proximity, right? If it's right in your face, and it's easy to use, you'll probably use it. It's human nature. So I think, don't battle yourself on that. Make it harder to access. The problem of scale that I mentioned regards more to your business, and it's almost hedonic adaptation of business. Now that I'm thinking about it out loud live on the stream, and by the way, these are all shot live. Okay. So you're getting the hot take here. Hedonic adaptation in your business or problems of scale looks like, perhaps you want to go from managing 1 or 2 buildings to then suddenly managing 10 buildings. Well, all of a sudden you may need more infrastructure, and that might look like software, might look like a property manager. It might look like a internal staff, right? Maybe you hire a property manager instead of contracting that work out because you believe you'll get better work. Any number of things can lead to you spending more money inside your business or inside that revenue stream and then shrinking the actual benefits. Short term, likely, hopefully, it's a short term shrinkage of that income. And what ends up happening is your goal may transition then from $3,000 to something much bigger so that you can support the infrastructure and overhead that you've now had to build to support that revenue stream. So I think planning for this type of thing is important, right? Because if Matt's goal there was to net 3,000, well, netting 3,000 might change along the way where you have to add infrastructure in order to support that operation. And so it just might add time. And I think that's another thing to be very considerate about when we're doing SMART goals. I believe it's a Gary Vee quote. He says something along the lines of people overestimate what they can do in the space of 1 year and ridiculously almost underestimate what they could do in 5 years. I believe that's the quote. I could be totally wrong. Drop it in the comments if I'm wrong.
It's Bill Gates who says that people overestimate what they can accomplish in a year and underestimate what they can accomplish in 10 years. And I think that really is a powerful sentiment because I see so many people when they decide to get into real estate investing, they're like, I'm going to make $1 million in my first year. Awesome. If you can, more power to you. That's fantastic. But the people that I often see succeed, they commit not just to the result, but to the process. And oftentimes it takes a while to master any new endeavor, right? In the book, Mastery, Robert Greene really explores that and comes up with, the concept of like 10,000 hours, or the idea that it often takes a couple years to really become a master in any one individual field. And while you won't necessarily have to spend a full 10,000 hours to say, become a real estate investor or start developing passive income, those that are committed to the process, I just often see them, wildly outperform the others that are going through the motions just because all they want is the shiny thing at the end of the rainbow.
Yeah, thanks, Matt, for that quick correction. And drop it in the comments if you think it's hilarious when Adam misquotes things, because it's going to happen a lot.
And so you touched upon Dean Graziosi's exercise that he got from Joe Stump called the 7 levels deep or 7 levels wide deep exercise. We'll pull up the screen share here and I'll maybe just walk you guys through it. I don't think that you have to do this with SMART goals, but circling back to that idea of specific, like why is it important? I think that this is a great exercise to really make sure that you're not just intellectually bought in, but you're as well emotionally bought in to achieving this goal. A very simple exercise, but like Adam said, oftentimes people struggle with it the first time or two they undertake it. But like anything, view it as an iterative process. So literally what the exercise is you're going to ask yourself the question, why is important to you blank, whatever blank is, 7 times. And usually what happens is once you've gone through 5, 6, 7 levels of asking yourself why in this regards, it's usually you'll start to really discover the emotional core of what you're seeking to undertake. And so for a lot of real estate investors, when I would speak to them, it would often start off with like, I want to get into real estate investing to have a bunch of money. Cool. Well, why is having a bunch of money important to you? Well, having a bunch of money is important to me because I hate my job and I want to quit it. Cool. Why is, quitting your job important to you? Well, the reason quitting my job is important to me is I don't get to spend enough time with my kids and they're growing up too fast. Awesome. Why is spending a lot of time with your kids important to you? Well, the reason spending a lot of time with my kids is important to me is because, that they're only kids once. My parents didn't have the same amount of time to spend with me growing up as I wish they would have. And, I want to be the change in my family and make sure that my kids have full access to me. Well, we went from making a bunch of money to, caring about your family and making sure that you're setting them up for success, not just financially, but, emotionally, or by providing your time and guidance as well. That's a much more powerful reason behind why this goal is important to you than just the idea of stacks of cash. Or at least for the average person, it's going to be the case that there's an emotional core behind why they want to achieve it, right? Again, it maybe isn't about family. Maybe you saw your parents fighting over money growing up, or maybe it's because you always felt like you had to do without growing up. Whatever the case is, it's very valuable for you to get to the emotional core of the goal you're seeking out, because without that, it can be sometimes very difficult to motivate yourself. Whereas if you know exactly why you're undertaking this goal, and you've got specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-based goals in that regards, and you've broken them out into milestones, I know which horse I would bet on in that race. Absolutely. So again, just thought that was important to hit upon. And again, you guys can go through this entire exercise yourself. I really encourage you to do so. I wish that this stuff was more easily available and more easily known by everyone. I don't think that there's a single person that wouldn't be better off for understanding and buying into SMART goals.
Yeah, same. And I honestly don't see any downsides either. So if we were going to try and, straw man doing these activities, I honestly don't know what you could tell me to convince me that this wasn't a valuable exercise to go through. I think people are often afraid to share their goals. They're often afraid to write them down because they fear, again, the long climb potentially up to where they want to go. But I do believe that writing them down and beginning sharing your goals with the people around you is one of the fundamental things to helping you get to the right social circles, to helping you get to the right educational content, to helping you get to the right network of people that can help you, whether it's your personal life or your business, actually achieve these things. And I think that's also something that we haven't really mentioned, but as you go through your SMART goal, you'll likely find that not everybody in your life fits your SMART goal, right? And perhaps there are people in your life right now that aren't actually helping you to contribute to that SMART goal. And these goals, when we write them down, I think it's a great period for inner reflection, right? We get to reflect on, okay, well, what are we currently doing, right? What are my current habits? What's my daily life look like right now? What is my energy and time being spent doing right now? Who am I hanging out with? Are these people actually going to be the ones that help me get where I need to go? And that's where I find we can do the 1% better every day, right? Is it starts here. It starts by understanding, like, what is the actual end state that I'm gunning for here? And what would it look like? What would it feel like if I was there? And I think when we start asking these questions, it can be brutal at the start. I think it can be a little bit hurtful to really understand your position compared relatively to where you want to be. But I think that can be converted and used as a source of energy to help you get there. I mean, if you're frustrated, if you're upset, if you're angry about your current position in life, or, even the progress you have towards your goals, I think that's a completely normal feeling. I think that's actually a useful feeling, in the same way that, touching a hot oven is useful, right? It's good to learn that is hot and shouldn't be done. And I think by upgrading our social circles, building out our networks, and honestly thinking critically about what it would take in order to get to our goals, we can actually achieve things that we otherwise would possibly never do, or would have taken us a considerably lot longer time. And I think that's Matt illustrated this great with his perspective. And I don't need to run you through everything about my journey, because it was actually very similar to Matt's. And we both came into real estate. So we had a similar sort of thought process that we had to work through. But I guarantee you that if we did not think about the end state of where we were trying to go, we would not have got it achieved in such fast time. This is such an incredible tool to help you get to where you want to be faster and with less abrasion and less conflict. This will help you actually get there with the right people around you, right? Assembling a power team to help you get your goals. And if thinking about physical fitness, this might be a trainer, or this might be a simple walk with on a daily basis, right? You don't need to get 6-pack abs overnight, but it is good to start considering what you're putting in your body, how you're moving your body, right? And making those small steps towards it. The same thing happens with money. You probably aren't going to make $1 million overnight. It's very unlikely. And whatever you would do in order to do be extremely high risk. And so it's perhaps not sustainable to even think like that. It's just not achievable, right? And that's one of the things that we want to look out for here is this realistic, right? Is it achievable? So when we're setting out to do these things, operating your social circle, looking in on yourself and really gaining some proof of your position, it's not a bad thing, however uncomfortable it might be. So I know I've experienced this discomfort. Matt, have you been on some of your goals before?
Yeah, absolutely. And just building upon what you were saying there, like no one accidentally gets six pack abs. No one accidentally becomes a millionaire. It's often going to be through consistent effort. And for the average person, we're just not going to be willing to put in the effort without clearly understanding why we're going through the process and believing in the process as well. And that's where I think SMART goals, play such a critical role in anything related to self-development, improving yourself, improving your position in life. For me, I've definitely struggled at times in regards to goals I set out for myself. But honestly, the more time I spend iterating and building in specific milestones and following through on kind of the outline we've shared here in regards to SMART goals, the easier it becomes, in my opinion, to be able to just move forward and trust in the process, right? The same way that if you've know that someone's ran that 4 minute mile, in my opinion, it's so much easier to train to run that 4 minute mile. If you know that someone's made $1 million investing in the strategy that you're looking to invest with, it's so much easier to believe in the process. And so, again, that's why going through asking yourself these questions in regards to SMART goals is such a key component of actually getting to the success that you're seeking.
Yeah, I think this just cannot be stressed enough. And I actually love, and again, guys, these assets, these resources are going to be posted on our Substack. So make sure you go over and subscribe to the Substack to get access to this. But the resources here that Matt's talking about and this infographic and some of these questions, I mean, they sound simple. But if you think long and hard about some of these questions, I mean, this is deep stuff. And I want to touch on it one more time. You're going to have to do this multiple times. You're going to have to involve other people. And when you do that, again, it's going to be uncomfortable, but it's going to help you. And I think that's the key to all of this stuff is it's going to help you get there and get there faster.
Absolutely. And so we don't want to overcomplicate the process of SMART goals here or, beat a dead horse. Really encourage you guys, go check out the e-guide, join and follow us on Substack, as well as join the Telegram chat where we'll continue this conversation. I guess anything else on SMART goals you want to say, Adam, before we wrap up this episode?
Well, I thought, Matt, having our first comment here, we might actually address one of our first comments from a viewer, the Hungarian Experiment, who is looking to achieve what looks like $500,000 to $750,000 in gross sales in 2023, plus, and then get to $1 million plus in 2024. So, thank you for commenting. You are the first comment being brought onto the show. So, Matt, did you have any ideas? Like, obviously, that's a fairly specific goal, or at least it's measurable, right? In order to get to $500,000 to $750,000 per year in gross sales. But I believe that just in that brief comment, we're missing some of the other things that would be outlined in a SMART goal.
Well, I think given the context that obviously we know Peter the Hungarian Experiment, let's kind of walk through quickly that checklist or the concept of SMART goals. So is it specific? Do we know what we want? Yep, it's gross sales. And again, is it measurable? Yep, we've got it in dollar amount, so it's very clear for us there. Is it achievable? So I think one of the big questions is, has anyone in that niche ever performed to that degree before? And when it comes to social media marketing, to content creation, to even just like the niche of real estate investing and helping out real estate investing content creators, I would say yes, that either that has been done or in similar industries, we've seen people be able to achieve that. So it also checks off that box of realistic because we've seen someone go through and execute to that degree before. And then time-based, we've got specific dates there. So I think that's really important as well. And circling back even to the idea of the A again, achievable, we know that Peter's been working for years already in this niche, building out his expertise, putting in that 10,000 hours to become an expert in this field. So given the context of what we kind of know behind the scenes, I feel like it does check all the boxes in regards to SMART goals.
Yeah, another thing that I wanted to note here is we have an update here that they're currently at 350 to 400,000 in revenue. And one of the interesting things is that we're essentially trying to do a doubling the revenue or a bit less on the lower end of that. And one of the interesting things that I've learned, at least, and one of the challenges with scale that I brought up earlier, is that doubling doesn't necessarily mean doubling your infrastructure. It's certainly possible to add some infrastructure and get compounding results in the revenue side of things. So definitely that makes me think that this is, even more realistic, right? And I love that there's set times and specific dates. One of the things that I would want to do if I was trying to unpack this goal is I would want to understand how many existing customers do I have? How much am I grossing off each of those customers? And then what does that mean in terms of client acquisition I would actually need to do from the sales perspective in order to get to that number if all of my margins stayed the same. So if I was able to get the same amount of revenue off of each new customer, how many new customers would I need to get? I would then break that down into a 12-month schedule so that I would understand how many new clients per month would I need to get, or how much new revenue per month would I need to get, and then break that down into the marketing element of, in order to get those clients, how much marketing do I need to make? How much marketing do I need to do? How many rooms do I need to be in? What different platforms or channels would I need to advertise on in order to attract those new customers? And then take that down into daily actionable items. And that's something that I don't think we've necessarily covered in this talk yet, was the daily actionable item list. So when you've got this giant goal, it is really useful to break that down into a quarterly or a monthly goal. And this is often why, Wall Street's using quarters. We'll break this down into a monthly goal and then figure out daily actionables so that every day we're actually focusing on the things that are going to have the greatest output or greatest impact to actually achieve that bigger goal. So doing this can even inform you about which business practices are most important to do on a daily basis and how to schedule your time. And I think that that's a topic, Matt, that we didn't cover that well in this talk, and perhaps something that we should, or I'll add upon right now, which is just, how to use your time is a really difficult question if you don't understand, again, what your end state is. And breaking things down into daily actionable items will tell you how to budget your time on an 8-hour scale, right? Or a 12-hour scale, however long you're going to be spending working or working towards your goal. And that's what's actually going to allow you to schedule your habits around achieving that goal. So if you look at my calendar, my daily calendar, it is scheduled in such a way that I have everything ordered and scheduled so that I can achieve the actual big, hairy, audacious goal that I'm setting out for. And again, just leaning back on Drucker there, that what gets measured gets managed. If you're not measuring what you do on a daily basis, you'll find yourself a week in, 2 weeks in, a month in, without actually making adequate progress towards your goal. And time slippage is a big issue when you're attacking big goals, okay? Because it's very easy to work on things that keep you busy rather than work on the things that are actually getting you closer towards the goal. So breaking those big goals down into monthlies and then further into weeklies and then down into daily actionable items. That's how I've gotten my biggest goals achieved. And that's how I believe you can help yourself the most. So Matt, I think we've talked quite a bit about SMART goals now. And, to your point, I don't want to complicate this. I don't think this is a complicated situation, but it's one of those perhaps simple, not easy things. And I think the first step is just getting started.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, commit to the process and understand the process is iterative. I think after that, everything falls into place as long as you're willing to use that framework of SMART goals, eventually start breaking things down into measurable milestones, as you were saying. And yeah, I just encourage everyone, spend a little bit of time. Think about what it is you're currently trying to work towards and whether you have specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-based goals built around that. If you don't, understand that you're probably going to be less effective, less efficient when it comes to executing and achieving those goals versus the individual that decides to spend a little bit of the prep work, right, and figure out exactly what their SMART goal is going to be. Makes me think of that Abraham Lincoln quote, right? The idea of, if you ask me to chop down a tree, I'm going to spend the first 7 hours sharpening the axe, 1 hour chopping down the tree, versus just trying to use a dull tool. And I think that unfortunately a lot of people are using a dull tool when it comes to trying to achieve their goals, because they never just invest the time on the front end to build out that SMART goal framework and matrix.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. That's a great place, I think, to wrap this up, Matt. But I'm really excited. Everybody, if you're here, if you're watching this, you're early. Okay, we're still going to be figuring some of this production out, but we really appreciate you for tuning in. And again, I hope you enjoy our content. The spirit of what Best Day Ever Media is about is really trying to work towards having that best day ever. And I think what that looks like to us is getting 1% better every day. So the talks that we're going to be doing are topical. Okay, so every day of the week is going to be different for you. Tomorrow, we're going to be actually talking about sleep. I went down a deep rabbit hole trying to understand what sleep really is and how we can improve the quality of our sleep and what that really means for our overall health. And I'm very excited to show and share with you my research and walk you through some of the findings and takeaways that I got. So Matt, is there anything you would like to say to wrap this up other than get these people over to Substack right now, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate everyone joining us for our first episode. It really does mean a lot to us. Really appreciate you jumping in the comments there, Peter. I also saw Dan from DGen Friends, and we look forward to growing this. We're going to be here for a while. We're committed to producing this content and growing with you guys over time. If you want to give us your input, your thoughts, your suggestions, I think Telegram or Substack comments is the best place to do it. But again, just appreciate everyone. Subscribe on whatever platform you're watching, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Awesome, guys. Have the best day ever.
They say life is what you make it. So what happens if you actually try? What if you actually tried to get your mind right? What if you actually tried to live the high life? What if you happen to die cause life is finite? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? What if you actually tried to get your mind right? What if you actually tried to live the high life? What if you happen to die cause life is finite? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? What if you actually grind out when the time's right? What if you actually blinded by your hindsight? What if you actually find out what defines life? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? I'm getting 1% better every day. I'm getting 1% better every way. I'm waking up every day to a sunny day. No matter what the weather say, life is like a record, so just let it play.